We're here in the wonderful Song of Songs. It's about how he attracted a maiden and she becomes his bride, full of his love, full of who he is. And we're at the section in the song in chapter 7, verse 13, where the bride is mature. She's gone through so many experiences of being attracted, of following him, pursuing him. Now there's a perfection of beauty in her, and it's just shining forth the presence of God. The person of Christ is just manifested. He's reflected through her beauty, through her character, and especially through her affections. But even more in this section, in verses 11 through 13, she's entered into his movements, into actions and service that match his interest. Now she's doing his will. So her person, who she is, and her beauty and her work are one. Who she is and what she does expresses her beloved Christ. This is really a marvelous maturity of a lover of Christ. In verses 11 and 12, the perfected bride, in union with the beloved Christ, they go into the field to sow seeds of life. They entered into villages to rest, and then they inspected vineyards to support any kind of new blossoms of other loving seekers. And then she takes care of the fruit, producing branches of the vine. And so her desire in such a union with him is as Psalm 115, verse 1. Not to me, but to your name is all the glory. Her actions bear fruit, but it's all for his glory. She's done a great service. She's seeking the lost. She's caring for the vineyard with so much new growth. But through all this, the glory is for him. The pleasure is for him. It's not for her personal pleasure, although she has entered into something so wonderful. Her work is for his satisfaction, and not for hers. And we just need to pray, Lord, keep me from pride. Any achievement that happens in union with you is for your pleasure, not mine. In verse 13, that we're reading right now is a result of the work of the service. And it says the mandrakes give a smell, and at our gates are all manner of pleasant fruits, new and old. And then she says, which I have laid up for you, O my beloved. In verse 13, the result of the work is an accumulation of the experiences of the riches of Christ, which have grown into her and which she has gained in service. And so it's verse 13 is the gathered fruit. And here we have a very advanced stage of growth and experience of the bride. And it continues verse 12, where it's an explanation to further show how she's giving him the many loves. And this is expressed through the mandrakes in verse 13, all manner of pleasant fruits. There's new, there's old. It's stored up for him, it's laid up for him. So her person, who she is exhibiting Christ. This is wonderful. This is what we want. We want to exhibit Christ. We want his beauty to shine through us as the bride. And also service. Her service is a bearing abundant fruit. So now she's balanced in her maturity. She's not focused only on her personal growth, or neither is she just work-centered or service-centered. Who we are is what we do. You can't serve more to others what you don't have. Our life is a channel of blessing. What we impart is what we have of Christ as the outflow of our service. So there's a surplus of life within us. There's a surplus of love within us. And this is our work. The work should be our living and our affections in union with Christ. So in this verse, there's a question that some have, and I'll just mention it. It's not a major thing, but they say, who's speaking in verse 13? Is it the continuation of the bride to Christ, or is it the answer of Christ to her fourfold prayer prayer or demand, and let us, when she says let us in verses 11 and 12, to inspect fruitfulness. And I would just say, whether it be whether it be bridal fruit, as accumulation of her perfections for Christ, she's saying this is for you, or the beloved's appreciation, as he begins to speak of in appreciation. The sweet smell in this verse, the abundant fruit, the accumulated storage, actually is just a mutual enjoyment of love. Whether who's speaking here, they're together enjoying this fruit. So she says that, I'm going to say it is her, and I'm pretty confident that she's speaking here. She says the mandrakes give a smell. And these fruit I considered are bright and golden yellow fruit. And throughout the song I've brought this up, that either jewels or gems or fruit, there's so many different interpretations of color and size or type, size of fruit, size of flower, and it could be many reasons. So I'm not really dogmatic on bright or golden yellow fruit, but this is what I've seen. And so if you say the fruit is red, I'm not gonna argue with you or have a debate. And these fruits, these mandrakes, are called love apples. And so it's in verse 12. She says, "I'll give you my loves." Now she says, "Here's the love apples." And the root meaning of this word mandrake actually means to love, and it's a love that exhilarates the spirit, and it stimulates to love. This is only used 2 times in the Bible. If you find another one, let me know. In Genesis 30, there was this love plant. This mandrake was given by Reuben to Leah, his mother. And then when Rachel saw it, she wanted it. So Leah obtained a union with Jacob, her husband, by the price of the mandrake, and she paid it to Rachel. So this was a love scene between Leah and Jacob, and it's also a love scene here in our experience of Christ. She says the mandrakes give a smell, and these mandrakes give a strong, a pleasant fragrance, and they send forth a strong, acceptable scent, like a blowing wind, producing a devout feeling of love. So that you could just sense that there's just a loving fragrance in the air between them. This matter of smell in the Song of Songs and also in our life, hopefully it's been getting more definite, more stronger. And just to go through the song with some of these verses on smell, in chapter 1 verse 3, it was his ointments and his name that gave a fragrant smell. And then in verse 12 of chapter 1, as she sat at the table with the king, she gave forth a smell. It just drew something out of her. And then in chapter 2 verse 13, the aroma of the grapevines, of the growth of Christ, was giving a smell. And then in chapter 4 verse 10, it's just an amazing verse, that she begins to bear the same smell as Christ. And then in verse 11, her smell of chapter 4 was elevated. It was in an exalted life of Lebanon. And then in chapter 7 verse 8, we saw the fruitful scent of her discernment, or her nose. When you come to the New Testament, in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 15, it says that the lovers of Christ bear his sweet savor that is acceptable to God. So our life is a sweet savor wherever we go. It's bearing a sweet savor of Christ. Or if you look at in chapter 12 verse 3 of John, Mary came in there and she poured out her perfume, and this fragrance just filled the room with her outpoured love. On one hand, you see her breaking this vial, but actually it's something coming from her heart. And it was a fragrance of the love union that she had with Jesus. And this is also the love union that the bride has with the beloved. This is just actually a perfume of holiness that comes. Actually, it comes before she speaks about the fruit. So firstly comes the smell, and then it leads to the abundant fruit, which is more substantial, more significant, and every lover should have this kind of a sweet fragrance. And so she says it's at our gates, and then she uses the word "our." This is precious because many believers you talk to, the word they use most is "my." But in this verse, she uses the word "our." All things are common now between the two lovers. She holds nothing for herself, and his possessions belong to her. It's no longer my. It's no longer I. It's no longer mine. It's not. She's not doing things in her own strength, with her own ability, and she's not the goal anymore. It's not for herself. Whatever is done out of his power of love within her, and it's his love returns towards him. So she uses the word "our gates," and this is plural. So it seems like there's several open doorways, and since she uses the word "our," they belong to both of them, for the coming in and for the going out. And these gates, there's a smell of the mandrakes here. So were the smell of the mandrakes in the field, or before the entry, and they were growing on the wall of the doorway, or were they within the gate? So there's growth here of the mandrakes, of so many fruits in the verses 11 and 12. There's love here. There's openings here. There's doors here. So as she's walking in love in her obedient service with the beloved Christ on the prepared pathways in verses 11 and 12, there's so many opportunities which are as doors. And as we love the Lord and we're faithful to him, doors begin to open. Opportunities for service open. And we need to buy up these opportunities. While they're there, buy them up, because they might not be there tomorrow. They might not be there. The Lord opens the door and we need to enter. In Matthew 7:13 and 14, it says, enter into the narrow gate. So these doors or gates are narrow. Because the gate that is wide, there is a wide gate and it's broad and it leads to destruction. And many are going through this gate that leads to destruction. And there's many who enter in it. But the way to bridal affections, bridal love is small. The way is narrow and it leads to life. And there's few that find it, few that are willing to pay the price. And I pray the Lord's mercy that I and you both would be able to pay the price to follow Christ. Am I still following him on the narrow way through the small gate? She's in the place right now where she's still seeking the Lord because of these gates. And he can go into her heart, come out of her heart in a free way. And her heart is clear. It's an open heart. It's just an open gate that he has the freedom. And the gates also point to what is near at hand. She goes from the field to the villages to the vineyards. Now she's at the gates. And this is the place where Christ there's fruitful pleasure, and it's right at hand. It's not far off. And in these gates or these doorways, some interpret or take these gates as a gate with a storage on top. So when you enter in, there's a storage above the doorway with shelves, and these shelves are stored with the excellent fruit for the beloved. So what you've been doing in your life and the fruit that you've been bearing, the fruit of the Spirit, or in your service, is near at hand for the beloved's enjoyment. You know, these gates are related to two matters. One is related to the blood of Christ. In Exodus, it says the blood was put on the doorway. And also what we just mentioned in Matthew 17, the gates or the doorways are related to life. Our access and our union with Christ is based upon the redemption of his precious blood and his death. And we never outgrow the need to know the blood of Christ, the blood of his cross. And also the gates are related to the resurrection life of Christ, flowing in us, flowing out of us. Um, he's been imparted into us. He's growing in us. He's expressed in us. So we cannot go in and out, and he cannot go in and out um, without the blood of his redemption or his life-giving spirit in resurrection. So she says, at the gates are all manner of pleasant fruits. So these precious gifts of nature that have grown are of eminent value, and they're reserved after a time of ingathering. They've been ingathered. All manner. She says all manner. There's plenty. There's a variety. There's an excellency of blessings of grace received from Christ, and the work done by the Spirit through love becomes fruit, and the effects of grace in our life are fruit. So these all manner of pleasant fruit, and if there is an emphasis on a twofold fruit in this verses. One is internal, to God, the growth of Christ within us by the transforming Spirit. Something's happening within us. Fruit is being produced in us, and this is by the transforming Spirit. And secondly, the fruit is external. It's the good works of service which accompany this internal fruit. It is the exercise of a heart in union with Christ, which gives value to our actions and our works. So that in this verse is all manner of pleasant fruits. It's actually a glorious harvest that's bringing fullness of joy between them, to Christ and to her. And again, you could say these all manner of pleasant fruits can be in three categories. One is the issue of the union with Christ throughout the Song of Songs. In chapter 4, verse 13, she's a garden, and it uses this phrase, all manner of pleasant fruits. So personally, we need pleasant fruits to just develop in us. The other category would be the result of our labor. As we serve the Lord, as we take care of people, as we preach the gospel, as we shepherd new believers, as we restore backslidden believers, the result of that work is pleasant fruit. So the result of our labor. Inwardly, there's a pleasant fruit that is growing all the time. And with our fresh fellowship, the result of our labor. And then also, pleasant fruit is what is being brought forth by others as she was in the field, in the vineyards. So now she has been very much enlarged because she appreciates fruit that can be pleasing and satisfying to him wherever it is found. So firstly, there's a change of her person by the love union with Christ, and this is fruitful. She reflects his beauty, his character. She displays his virtues as abundant fruit. And then secondly, she lives and takes action by the love union with Christ, and this labor of love is abundant fruit. And then finally, by the love union with Christ, she begins to sow seeds of life, support new growth, develop a deeper love to him in the vineyards. Now it's no longer, can you say it's no longer my growth, but she's developing a deeper love to him in the vineyards. It's not her personal growth, love life, but she's laboring in service with Christ to produce a harvest of bridal beauty, bridal character, bridal affections in others. But unless my union and my fellowship with Christ is fruitful in beauty, character, affections, how can I expect to bear fruit in my living, my actions, and my work of love? What is in me actually will come out as my work. If I'm not attached to Christ, how can I expect to have a fruitful work? So if I'm not living in fresh fellowship with Christ, how can I serve in the vineyards to support the growth in other seeking lovers? So she said all manner. In the past, this is precious because in the past she could only recognize one special fruit that it was acceptable to the beloved, and that was what she gained of him. Even her fruitful life was only limited to herself at that time, exercising her love to him. Her vision and experience kept her in somewhat of a narrow way, although she was very fruitful and appreciated, even though she was a garden full of pleasant fruit. In her move and active service with the beloved, she can see fruit in others. This is a big thing. She begins to recognize in individuals, in groups of seeking lovers, that there's a great variety of excellent, choice fruit beginning to blossom in many lovers. And this is an increase of the bride for Christ's pleasure. She's no longer competing. She's not saying, I'm just pursuing for myself or comparing what she has with others, but her heart in these verses, she's become so enlarged. Her eyes are open to see Christ everywhere. She's Christ in her service, Christ in others, and this is pleasant fruit. It's costly, it's precious, it's the excellencies of Christ seen in her. It's His beauty, it's His majesty. And in Peter 1:4, it talks about how the divine life just grows out of us as we become a partaker of the divine nature. And then in 1 Peter 4, it talks about the growth of gifts and a variety of gifts that can be pleasant to our beloved Christ. And in Galatians 5, there's a variety of fruit. So these are all pleasant. The bride, she's bearing a costly, precious, excellent expression with her. It's she, in her maturity. She's just a reflection of Christ in her person, in her service, for His interests and for His pleasure. And she sees Christ everywhere. She sees Him in others, and then she begins to labor there. So I would just say there's two thoughts that I've seen in this section here, or this verse. To be a fruitful person, you will have a fruitful work, because our service actually comes out of who we are. And then secondly, an enlarged heart delights to see Christ blossoming in others. There's no jealousy, but there's only joy when we see Christ filling others, growing in others, that He can gain His bride in totality. Lord Jesus, gain your bride in us, in others, in our service, in whatever way you see fit. We love you.